Elements of effective teaching in a professional environment. This is task E of the fundamentals of instruction in area of operation 1. This is a required task, so you will for sure get asked about this task on your CFI check ride. And not only is it just cover important information, but I believe this is the most important FOI topic and task, because if you really take to heart the different characteristics and what we'll talk about, it will really make you a great flight instructor. So we're going to cover a couple things: the scope of responsibilities of instructors, different types of instructors, methods instructors can use to enhance their professional image. So we'll go over aviation and flight instructor responsibilities, what the differences between those two, qualifications, professionalism, professional development, and instructor ethics and conduct. Okay, so we're going to start off with aviation instructor responsibilities. And there's a difference between an aviation instructor and a flight instructor. An aviation instructor is more all-encompassing. So this will include things like maintenance, dispatch, air traffic control. It's more all-encompassing is what an aviation instructor is. A flight instructor is more specific, like specifically a CFI. That's the difference between the two. And so as an aviation instructor, as a CFI, we're going to be aviation instructors and flight instructors. So this is kind of a more broader view of what an aviation instructor's responsibilities are, and that's going to be our HEMPS acronym, HEMPSS. So we start off with H, help students learn. We're going to help students learn. So we want to make learning, fun and interesting. So one thing you could do, I've heard of an instructor that has done this, where they hid pieces of candy in the pre-flight and hid a piece of candy where the registration and where the airworthiness is, to make sure that they're actually checking that in their pre-flight. Doing little things like that to help encourage students to make learning enjoyable, fun, and interesting. The next is E for emphasize the positive. Positive instruction results in positive learning. Also, and this is going to be a common theme throughout this presentation, is that students will mimic what you do. So if I display a positive impression of aviation, and I speak positively about aviation, then the student's more likely to mimic that behavior. So whenever I talk about introducing stalls to a new student, I'm not going to say, all right, we're going to do stalls today. This is going to be fun. This is how people die because they stall the aircraft. That's not how I'm going to introduce stalls. So emphasize the positive. Next is minimizing learner frustration. So we've got an acronym within an acronym. So on the next slide, I'm going to get into this one. And that's our MACBAG acronym. So that'll be the next slide. So the M in our HEMPS acronym has MACBAG within it, acronym within the acronym. So I'll do that on the next slide. P in this HEMPS acronym is provide adequate instruction. Provide adequate instruction. So as long as you really take an interest in the well-being of your student, I think providing adequate instruction follows. Carefully and correctly analyze each learner's personality, thinking, and abilities, and adjust necessary. No two students are going to be alike, so what's adequate for one student may not be for another. And we want to teach students to be safe pilots, not just to pass a check ride. All right. And I do think it's kind of weird that the FAA uses this term, provide adequate instruction. Why don't they say, like, provide superb or excellent instruction? The word adequate, if someone described me as being adequate, I think I'd take offense to it. But I think the reason they do that is because, as a brand new instructor, you're not going to be as good at this as a 10-year CFI. But there's so much that you can do and so much preparation and care that you could pour into flight instructing, where you can still do a great job and do that adequate job of getting students through their licenses and creating safe pilots. So I think that's my theory as to why they use that word adequate. And then the two S's in this HEMPS acronym is standards of performance first. So we're going to train students at and above the standards within the ACS. And, the standards will change throughout their performance. on a student's second or third flight lesson, maybe I'm holding their altitude plus or minus 400 feet, versus I've got someone, check ride prep, and I'm going to be holding them to about plus or minus 100. So that will change. And the closer they are to their check ride, the tighter you hold those standards to within ACS. And then safety. The FAA calls instructors ambassadors of safety. And again, I talked about it before. This theme of students will mimic you. If I make safety my number one priority, then the student will mimic that, ensuring that safety is also their number one priority. So we want them to adopt that by us ourselves as instructors making safety our number one priority. All right, so this next slide, we skipped over this M in our HEMPS acronym, and all these acronyms, this HEMPS, and then this next one, this MACBAG, every acronym I give in this presentation, you have to have memorized. You will be asked about this on your check ride. So the M on our HEMPS acronym is our MACBAG acronym within an acronym. So let's get into it. How do we minimize learner frustration? Well, we can motivate our students. We can, let students know how a particular lesson will help them achieve their ultimate aviation goal. So talk to your student, know what motivates them, know why they're getting into flight training. Flight training, at the end of the day, is just a means to an end. They're going through the struggles of flight training because it's not comfortable to do it, and they're seeking, that ultimate reward and, to achieve their goal in aviation. And also, we want to reward them when they succeed. That kind of will tie into the give credit where credit is due down here. But, reward your students when they succeed. Approach learners as individuals. Everyone has different personalities, struggles, learning styles, everything. Everyone is so unique. And so understand as an instructor, no two students will learn the same. If you have a student who's more of a visual learner, then you're going to show them videos and be active with them, or more of an audible learner, then you may come at things from a different angle, and you do more lecture style instruction if they receive that better. You could have someone who likes to be more active, and so you take them out to the ramp whenever you're teaching things like aircraft systems, and you point to different parts around the airplane, or mixing all of these different methods into one and seeing what works better with different students. So approach them as individuals. Criticize constructively. Criticism that doesn't help the student, it's meaningless. So of course I'm not going to tell a student, those steep turns sucked. And they're going to be like, okay, what? I don't know. They don't know how to perform. They don't know how to do it better. So let them know, be specific, with a correction that needs to be made. And if I just say your steep turns suck, that doesn't help the student. It's meaningless. So only criticize constructively. Keep students informed. Inform students of their progress, and then your expectations for them, and that'll minimize their insecurity as to where they're at. In my own flight training, I felt this way earning my private license, and I was constantly prodding my instructor, asking if I was behind or if I was performing well. So, be the instructor that initiates your expectations and keep them informed on their progress. The B in our MACBAG acronym is be consistent. So we can kind of come at this from a few different ways. One, if one habit or one thing that the student does is acceptable one day but then unacceptable the next, they're going to get frustrated and become confused by that. Another way we can look at it is be consistent as an instructor. Come in with a consistent demeanor that is professional, so that your students know what to expect from you. They don't know whether they're going to get a happy CFI, a sad CFI, angry CFI that day. Be consistent so that your students know what to expect from you as well. Admit errors. Instructors are people too, and they make mistakes. Don't fib an answer that you don't know if a student asks you, because the student will sense that out. And give credit where credit is due. I kind of touched on this a little bit when we talked about motivate your students, because if you give credit where credit is due, that will aid in increasing student motivation. And students like to see their efforts noticed, so give them credit. Now, those were all aviation instructor responsibilities, or aviation instructors more all encompassing, including things like a flight instructor, dispatch, air traffic control, maintenance, more all encompassing. Now we're getting more into the specifics of flight instructor. And so this is our EFLAPS acronym. So the E stands for Evaluation of Student Ability. So we need to be able to evaluate our students. So look at where our students' ability is as they perform whatever knowledge or skill or task they're required to do, to what they should be based on their stage in their training. Consider each element of the performance individually. Again, tying back to that MACBAG acronym, keep that learner informed of their progress so that they know your expectation for them. And allow them to have minor errors that play out, of course, safety permitting. But letting students slam a couple landings in every now and then will help them, rather than an instructor grabbing the controls and never letting anything get close to the perfect landing. It's good to have that experience to know what will happen if they do X or whatnot. So there's really a fine balance as an instructor for one that's grabbing the controls too much and one that never touches the controls, and then that can impede in safety. So there's a fine balance that you have to play with. The F in our EFLAPS acronym is Flight Instructor Endorsements. Now, as a flight instructor, you can give endorsements that allow students to do things like solo, go on cross countries, take check rides, etc. So there's a whole bunch of regulations and rules that go along with flight instructor endorsements. That's for the technical subject areas. I'm not going to get into that right now, but that is a required area of a technical subject area that you will be asked about on your check ride as well. I have a video on it, so if you want to watch that video for the flight instructor endorsements and record keeping, I have a video of that on my channel. The L is learner pre-solo flight thought process. So, if you have a student that's finally getting to the point where from startup to shutdown, they're able to safely and with a high degree of competency and skill operate that aircraft, deal with, really deal with normal issues that come up in flight all by themselves, then that student's starting to get to the point where you're thinking about sending them to solo. So have a good understanding of your student's ability. That ties back into the evaluation of student ability. You have to have a good knowledge about what their ability is and what their ground knowledge is before you can have that confidence to send them to solo. The A in our EFLAPS acronym is additional training and endorsements. So you can do additional training in your students' futures and give endorsements for it. Things like flight reviews or instrument proficiency checks if you are a CFII. Pilot supervision. You have to ensure that your student is doing the correct safe things. When your student is demonstrating maneuvers and landings, you're not staring out the window, you're supervising that they are doing the correct safe procedures. The second P in the EFLAPS acronym is practical test recommendations. You're responsible for sending students off to practical tests, to check rides. So again, you have to really understand, to a high knowledge what your students' abilities and knowledge is. Because if you send a student to a practical test and they're not ready, the FAA views that as a breach of faith. That it's your fault as an instructor that you sent them when they weren't ready. So only send a student to a check ride if you are confident that they will pass. And then C and avoid responsibility. We need to stress that we keep our eyes outside, especially when we're in visual conditions when it's our responsibility. by law, by regulation. So it's our job to see and avoid other traffic, terrain, obstacles, etc. And on top of these responsibilities, students will have a hard time learning in the aircraft. So they'll run into some kind of physiological obstacles. The aircraft is an extremely difficult classroom to try to learn in, right? If you've never been into general aviation, you're going to be introduced to new sensations, vibrations, G-forces, sounds, and that makes a difficult learning environment. And especially in the beginning of flight training, you'll potentially have six students, and 6 students won't learn. The interesting thing about that is if you get motion sick when flying, you can actually, that goes away over time. My first couple flights in flight training, I didn't get super sick, but I would leave with kind of an upset stomach, and then after maybe a week or two of flight training, it just totally went away. So if you have a student that does get sick and they're discouraged, like maybe I don't know if flight training's for me, you can let them know that is something that you overcome in time. So we'll talk about now, we're kind of shifting into qualifications and professionalism. So we want to be, thoroughly familiar with the aircraft and its systems, and maintain familiarity with the pilot training techniques and certification requirements. So staying up to date with different things like regulation changes and knowing certification requirements, so we know, the hour requirements our student needs for a check ride, so they don't get too meeting up with an examiner on the day of their check ride and they don't have enough cross-country time. Knowing the ACS standards for each of the maneuvers that your students are having to show on their check ride and communicating that with them. Show them how to read the ACS. Now we're going to talk about professionalism, being professional as an instructor. This is the SAD-PP acronym. The first is sincerity, so being straightforward and honest with your students. That includes admitting when you make errors and just have an interest in that well-being and in the success of your student, and sincerity will follow. Accept the student. Accept the student for where they are in their training, including all their faults and problems. If they're moving from one instructor to the next and they can't do their steep turns. I keep using steep turns examples, but I'll just continue with it. Accept them for everything that they're at right now, and then grow with them, help them grow. Demeanor. So we want a professional demeanor, which is calm and thoughtful, avoiding erratic movements, mood swings, distracting speech. We want to be consistent, and so that way the student comes to you and they know what they're gonna expect out of you. All right, personal appearance and habits. Your appearance has an image influences the image of a professional instructor. So show up neat, clean, appropriately dressed. Don't smell. You're going to be locked in a 1-ton metal box with students for hours at a time. Brush your teeth, put on deodorant, don't smell. And then use of proper language. So speak positively of aviation and descriptively, and refrain from the use of profanity. Qualifications and professionalism. So here's a list of do's and don'ts. A lot of these we kind of already went through, like our MACBAG acronym and instructor don'ts. So these are kind of obvious. No using profanity, say one thing but do another, forget personal hygiene, disrespect the learner. It's all pretty much like common sense stuff. Set the learner up for failure. But all this is covered in the acronyms that we've talked about so far. So let's talk about professional development. So, how do we, develop this professionalism? We can continue our education, so be alert for ways to improve your qualifications, effectiveness, and services. So, pilots are always learning. That learning never stops. So continuing to always strive for more, increasing your own qualifications. continuing to study, attend training seminars. Learning doesn't stop. Continue that education. And we want to be up to date on our sources of material. So staying current on our regulations. If there's updates to the AIM or regs or the ACS, or there's new advisory circulars, stay up to date on that source of information. Also staying up to date with our aviation charts on our FOI, because things change. Runway numbers change, runway assignments change, frequencies change. Anyway, staying up to date with our source of material. And the last thing we're going to talk about here is the instructor ethics and conduct. So this is the list given by the FAA for the ethics and conduct. So you're teaching a pilot who should make safety their number one priority. If we make safety our number one priority, students will mimic how you fly. And so if we make that our priority, they will in turn make that their priority. Develop and exercise good judgment in making decisions. So help your students, experience or make good aeronautical decision making. So helping them, maybe even on-site of flight training, make go no-go decisions. Maybe before a flight, you'll just text them to the METAR, and you'll say, "What do you think?" Now maybe I don't want to text it to them only on bad weather days, because then they'd get a text from me, and then they think, okay, well, he's texting me the METAR. Maybe he's looking for me to say it's a no-go. But even on clear weather days or days where maybe it's marginal or whatnot, text them and just let them know what they think, and help them develop, looking at the weather and exercising that aeronautical decision making and going through risk analysis to make a good go no-go decision. Recognize and manage risk effectively. So that kind of ties into what I was talking about. It's as pilots, we're going through that risk management process all the time. So help them, students, to do that, and don't do that for them, because that's really puts a halt on that developed skill that they need to have in order to have that pilot in command mentality. Be accountable for their actions. Of course, not fibbing an answer if you don't know something, and be accountable for your actions if you mess up. Act with responsibility and courtesy. That kind of follows if you have just the genuine interest in the success of your student. Adhere to prudent operating practices and parameters, and adhering to applicable laws and regulations. So following procedures and staying within the law of the regulation. Seek proficiency in aircraft control. A lot of the time, most of the time you're flight training, you are, of course, the more experienced pilot in the right seat, and yet you're going to be on the controls not a lot. The brand new student's going to be on the controls the vast majority of the time. And so we want to make sure that we're constantly staying proficient. So whether that's if you felt like you haven't done a lot of landings recently, hop in the traffic pattern and stay proficient yourself. Use flight deck technology in a safe and appropriate way. Things like GPS or different tools that we have in the flight deck. We're not using that as a crutch, but we're using that to help aid in situational awareness and keep us safe. Be confident in a wide variety of flight situations. If we're confident in a wide variety of flight situations, like in the traffic pattern, in the practice area, on a long cross country, whatever, we want to stay proficient in all aspects of flight training as instructors, and be respectful of the privilege of flight. Flying really is a privilege that we are so lucky that we get to do. So be respectful of the privilege of flight. All right, that's it for elements of effective teaching in a professional environment. I want to make sure I talked about everything that I wanted to. We talked about the aviation instructor and flight instructor responsibilities, qualifications and professionalism, then professional development, and then went through the instructor ethics and conduct. Again, this task E, elements of effective teaching in a professional environment, is guaranteed to be on a flight instructor check ride know this information well, have all these acronyms memorized. And I like to give, examples for each of the things in my acronym. Have little examples for yours as well, and that'll help the DPE really know that you know that information. I'm kind of tying things back as well, tying things to different topics. There's one more thing that I wanted to say. So yeah, on the check write, it's not going to be like I kind of gave a presentation of the elements of teaching in a professional environment, but it'll be more conversational on your check ride. So your instructor or the examiner will probably give you some sort of scenario of you have a student that is lacking in motivation and is thinking about quitting flight training. You see that they're not on the schedule as much with you. What would you do with that student? Things like that. So then you can talk about how to motivate that student, which is, remember that M in our MACBAG acronym. This is important information to note, not only because it's on the check ride, but I do believe it's the most important FOI to definitely just have down. All right, that's about it for this one.